Next, we have Ms. Dawna Jones. She's the author of the bestseller, Decision Making for Dummies, and co-author of international bestseller, Writing to High Performance. She's a well-known international speaker as well. Dawna, welcome to our conference, WAVES 2020.
Delighted to be here. Thank you. I'm going to start my talk with a story that comes from my time traveling in India, which seemed appropriate. I just need to find the play button here underneath this drop down. First of all, I'm really delighted to be here. I'm on the west coast of Canada, and I know it's very late for you, but it's really early for me. So to fit me into this time zone challenge is a really great honor. The whole topic today is about resilient agility, and I want to start with some travels I did back in India many years ago, about a story about Feta Singh Rathore, who some of you may know and not know, and I really laughed when I saw the last question in the quiz was about tigers, or mentioned tigers at least, because that's precisely what Feta Singh was about to do. He decided to set up a tiger reserve in Rajasthan, just a bit southeast of Jaipur. Some of you may know it, and that was in '73, and in order to pull it off, he had to clear villagers out of the area. He had to clear the wood, the wood, people gathering wood, and he had to clear the people that were selling grazing rights in the park, which they didn't actually have. So there was a lot of things working against it. About 2 years before I got there, which was in 1983, he was found, a group of ganged up on him when he was found alone. They beat him to a mess, and somehow he managed to drive himself to hospital with 2 broken legs, 2 broken arms, and a broken pelvis. And there's different stories on how long it took to recover, but he took a while to recover, obviously. And for that, he received the International Valor Award, because after he recovered, he went back to the park and picked up as if nothing had happened, and he stayed on it. And of course, by this time, the villagers are definitely thinking he's some kind of god because he's come back from the dead and managed to bounce back in this way. So a really fascinating situation. Now, he picked us up at the train station and drove us to the park, and I mean, we were flying down that road. So we were probably going at least twice as fast as the road would suggest was okay. And I realized this guy had absolutely no fear of death. He went through that near-death process. He went back to the park. He did everything as he had done. So the core to this, and this is what's relevant to resilient agility that the thread will run through this conversation today, is he was on a mission to save the tigers of India. And what a worthy mission that is. So I'm going to stop sharing now and just bring that back to our conversation today. So just about everybody at some point or another has had things go wrong and sideways. And this is really, despite the fact it's annoying, it's also the place where we learn the most about ourselves and about what we're capable of. It's our chance to move up a level. My background is in facilitating and working with complex issues, very difficult ones. The more complicated they are, the complex. I'm not talking complicated, although we can get those too. But the more complex they are, the happier I am, because it means we can work with a lot deeper dynamics going on in an organization. So I've also worked across sectors and personal, team, organizational, and now I'm looking at national and higher, at the global level for the last couple of years. And it really is a learning lab for how do humans think. What happens when people are presented with COVID interruptions? What happens when things go not according to plan? How do we respond individually? How do we respond collectively? In my world, in my case, I could see the COVID or something COVID-like coming about 20 years ago. It was probably around 2002 when I changed gears and began to focus more on the kind of work we're talking about now today. And so because the real shift here is counting on security coming from the outside of our world, where everything, is really reliant on everything being the same all the time, which obviously it isn't. So when it gets interrupted, what do we have to rely on? We have to rely on what's on the inside. And that's the arc that COVID and other interruptions, project or otherwise, sort of demand us to say, okay, how am I going to respond in this? It brings it back here. So in this learning lab I had of working in policy and construction and you name the sector, it was enormous fun. I discovered that a lot of companies and a lot of management wanted to control performance, which is limiting, as you can appreciate, by absolute definition. And it means that if everything's certain, you're fine. If everything's predictable, you're fine. But frankly, obviously, that's not the territory we're in. It wasn't the territory we were in before COVID, but it's really not the territory we're in now. And so this is the place where 20 years ago or so, my mission was to reconnect decision-making back to looking after planet and people, to building that in. So really adapting decision-making to fit complexity. And of course, in order to do that, you have to learn with whatever shows up, even if it's inconvenient and uncomfortable and makes your brain hurt. And there's some strain and there's some confusion, but that's also where the really wonderful rewiring gets done that's in one's mind. You know, the neuroplasticity, neuroplasticity. So certainty is a great place to be comfortable, but uncertainty is the place for innovation and self-expression. And that's where in the 9 years I spent homeless, the 9 years, I like to use the word nomadic because it sounds cooler, but essentially, I was homeless. And when I was homeless, I realized, I have to shift how I see things completely. And there is a link to the 15-minute video we did for requisite agility that deeper dives into the skills that I learned from this, that if you're feeling thrown around by COVID, then that's a place to go and just get some insight into how to handle it. But it's really a school for this. So when along comes COVID, COVID is almost the identical characteristics of climate change. It's just immediate and in our face. It has systemic ramifications, the ripple effect across global, not just local, but global. And so as such, if you're as a project manager, it's the perfect place to learn how to work with dynamic, uncertain, emergent conditions. It is a training ground for that. Now, when we talk about resilience, we often think, oh, well, let's just go from, and you've heard this conversation, no doubt, let's just go from where we were back to normal. Let's just, resilience is bouncing back. But really, it's about bouncing forward. In other words, raise the bar, keep going well past. And that's something that takes probably more courage than one thinks one has, but it is the place to go because, first of all, normal is a really moving thing and not going to be the same for everybody. So you're anchoring you're anchoring the concept inside of what you'd like to see. What would you like to create coming out of COVID? And I'm going to return to that. So just to summarize, the arc then is from controlling the outer world, other people, trying to control the environment you're in and the circumstances that you're in, which you sometimes you have control of it, but more often than not, you don't. And so it's to shift it from that stance of moving things around outside to being a strong and anchoring on the inside. And that's the real. So of course, you're going to run into the things that set off the fear zone, which is one of them being status. If I lose my status, who am I? And I love the conversation just held previously because it was very much touches on the same thing. It's being really anchored in my desire to achieve my fullest potential, regardless of the conditions I'm in. And in fact, what we're talking about here is using adversity to advantage, to putting it to work for you. And when you don't put it to work for you, there's suicide, there's depression, there's all these other unpleasant things, some of which you can come back with. Depression you can certainly come back with. Anxiety you can come back with from, I should say, but suicide not so much. That's a pretty final decision, so to speak. So I want to just now go back to the deck and not wrong deck. That's not what I wanted. Sorry. Let me go back to the right one. That doesn't help. Just going to go back to the deck now, and every platform is different. It's very, very entertaining. This is how, let me just sneak under here and see if I can push that button. This is how nature innovates. It is nonlinear. In other words, it does not follow the rules that majority of decision making follow, which is cause and effect. If we input from a original engineering point of view, input plus process equals output. It does not follow those rules. It just, observing the pandemic is the place to see how it works in a nonlinear fashion. It uses crisis or disruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes, floods, natural disasters all fall into that category. Nature also it's a rapid and radical shift, so it's not incremental, which is what our organizations tend to think is how it works. It's not incremental, and it's very interconnected, and certainly you've borne witness to that, and as project managers, you've certainly seen how one thing connects to another, so there's a pinging effect. There's always a shift to a higher order in nature. In other words, it's an evolutionary process. And there's with that comes for us as humans sitting on this oasis in the galaxy, it is an opportunity to shift our worldview. So because these are the principles that have run the planet for 4.5 billion years, retained and sustained vitality, and we have not. This is the place where we really learn how to be better at being human, but also on how to respect all life on the planet as well. And I started with the tiger story, remembering just what an honor it was to be amongst these incredible creatures, and of course seeing the rest of the wildlife in India, which is pretty spectacular, obviously. So what I want to do now is just go through the resilient agility guiding principles. I just used 4 C's. It could have been in English. There could have been others, of course. But the first one, it always starts within you, and that is to stay in balance yourself. And there's a lot of skills in that you'll see in the video that I've sent the link to. That excuse me. So it's balancing yourself, and by that it means taking time out. Being comfortable with being in your own company, because that's where you're going to learn what comes up. Breathing is the core skill here, deep breathing, and it transcends yoga, it's neuroscience, it's martial arts. If there's one thing that gets threaded through all of those, it is breathing. So deep breathing is the way to bring yourself back into a state of coherence, which is the second part. And that's to use adversity to achieve coherence. So everything, as long as it's certain, there's no reason to worry about everything's just tickety-boo. But obviously, when things go wrong, or you're in a noisy climate or environment, you need to stay coherent, because you're constantly picking up data from people around you, from the environments you're in. It's biological. You can't argue with it. You can, but you won't win because it's biological. So there's coherence, and then you need a challenge, because if Theta Singh had not chosen the challenge to put that park in place, save those tigers, and make sure tigers stayed a part of India's national heritage, then he would not have had a way to come out of the hospital and go back to business, go back to that goal and to stay with that. In my case, my focus was on connecting decision-making back to working with complex conditions, to how we look after everything around us. So that has not changed. That was my anchor going forward, and I'm going to present you with one before the end of the conversation today. So, and I'm not going to deal with this today, but I wanted to put it in because everybody goes, well, so many constraints. I'm working with a team with Italy right now, and they say culturally we've got all these limits and constraints, and that, yeah, but video game players use those to go up a level, and I know there's a number of video game players in this audience who know exactly what I'm talking about. And so it's the same thing. We're just using those constraints for creative response. So I guess I better mention the other part of this shift is when humans have been trying to survive on the planet, they've done whatever it takes to survive: consumption, exploitation. People are resources. We use them, we throw them away. You know, there's a lot of unethical behavior that goes with that concept. And the shift that we're in right now that COVID invites us to do is to switch over to a more creative, use more of that creative talent that you already have, but just haven't tapped into yet. So this is it. The challenge, though, I will say the other thing about the challenge is you have to accept it. It's not just having it imposed on you, because that's when people start feeling victimized. But it is to say, yeah, I'm going to step into that, and we'll touch on that again. So welcome to COVID University for working with complex systemic interruptions. Great fun. Best chance we'll have to handle things like climate change, which is much quieter in its signaling and in how it shows up. And with respect to biodiversity, I mean, I'll give you for example, if the bee population collapses, 70% of our food supply worldwide goes with it, that species, that one species. So what we're dealing with here then is an opportunity to strengthen self-efficacy, which is the belief that a good outcome is in your direct control. So it's using fear as fuel. It was Stephen Kotler recently said that I think he said that on a frequency level, fear is the flip side of curiosity. So if you can feel yourself start to seize up and you're in a fear mode, do your best to flip it to curiosity. What do I need to know? What can I ask myself? It's a self-exam, flipping it to self-examination. That's the pivotal point there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, accepting the challenge. It's a full-bodied yes. It's not a yeah, sure. It's a yes, because it will call on all of your intelligences, not just your intellectual ones. It's a far deeper acceptance of the challenge. So now I'd like to, oh, wait, before I do that, I need to go back to Coherence. So I want to give you a real feeling for what Coherence is about. I'm hoping all of you are sitting down, because if you're not, I would not do this. You'll fall over. But take your right foot and turn, put it in the circles to the right. So that may have been backwards, I realized. Anyway, turn it your right foot in circles. And now that you've got that in the groove, take your right hand and draw the number 6. And watch what happens. So, I mean, I can't see the chat pane, but I'm looking forward to hearing how you experience that. But the bottom line is that your body is wired for coherence. Coherence is a scientific term for harmony. It refers to all of the layers, all of the various things interacting with one another in a harmonic and coherent state. That doesn't mean there isn't any conflict. Actually, conflict's useful for growth and change, but it does mean that it's all working together. It's all interrelated. And to give you an example, when you are healthy, your body is in coherence. When your body is fully healthy, when the ecology is healthy and coherent, then we have a vibrant, sustainable environment, and we have everything respecting everything else. So that's what I mean by coherence. So sorry, I had to kind of flip back and pick that up, but I hope you had fun with that. So let's step into the challenge, because this is where transcendence takes place. This is where you take what you think is the most challenging part of COVID and turn it into something that can serve the nation. So I am hoping, obviously, that by the end of my conversation with you today, that you will see that what your personal actions can tie directly into how your nation recovers from the state it's in, whatever, however we got there, here we are. This is Gapframe. It was developed by Business School Lausanne in Switzerland in 2016. These are 2016 numbers. And what you'll see from it is that blue is ideal conditions, green is safe space, yellow is watch list, and red and gray are critical and a threat. Now, India has one item, as you can see. There's only a few things that are in the good zone. So there's lots of what I would call leverage points in this graph. Lots of places where you can take your projects and tie them to whether it's employment or otherwise you can tie them to one of these one of these levers and start making some systemic changes. So again, not linear logical, but just saying, if I push on this, there's a good chance this will help. So if I push on employment, which is in the red zone, definitely health will improve, although that's already good, but you can actually start to see what are the ripple effects. The conversation previously talked about transparency, being honest with oneself, and you can see that's in the red zone. So great place there to, the more people are transparent, the more honest they are, the more they put things forward, even though it's an inconvenient and uncomfortable truth, the easier it is to work with it, and the less energy is spent trying to hold up an illusion. So the details here, I did my best to photograph the report, but you can go to gapframe.org and take the report down yourself, but, because for reference purposes. So this is the breakdown into 4 quadrants: planet, society, governance, and economy. And so those are the 4 quadrants. And you can use that then to take your projects and to connect them to, can we do this project and while doing so improve sanitation? Can we take this project and while we're doing so improve drinking water for the community? So constantly cross-referencing what it is you're doing with a higher goal that is one that the team can really coalesce around, engage with, and make a difference on the ground in your communities. And I know you've already, PMI Corella has already got some really great stuff happening. It's just delighted to see that. So my colleague, Doug Kirkpatrick, who is the co-author From Hierarchy to High Performance and a specialist in self-management, is talking about what Jaipur Rugs is doing right now. And of course, they are doing essentially that. This is a self-managed company. It's artisanal based, and they are using a combination of self-management to, secure employment for people that might otherwise not be. It's a high integrity company, and that is another aspect. If you just flip back here without making you dizzy, business integrity, ethical behavior is in the gray zone. So Jaipur Rugs is a good example of how to address that issue through an entrepreneurial initiative. Okay, so again, thank you very much, Vinod, for mentioning flow. I didn't have to jump into that. There are 12 triggers for flow states. As managers, if you're a project manager, one of the roles you can play is to set those conditions, is to actually create those conditions for optimal flow. And if, for example, you've lost your job and you're wondering what to do with that, you can use those flow triggers for yourself. You can apply them, and that's what I did when I wrote Decision Making for Dummies. I was on the road traveling, and then I wrote a chapter for the Intelligence of the Cosmos on how complex systems and the new role of business in terms of creating safe environments for decision makers, and then the third one, From Hierarchy to High Performance. So you can use those same triggers, those same principles or flow triggers for yourself as you can for your teams, as you can for an organization, as you can for a community. It's really fractal in its character and nature. So that's the challenge I'm going to present to you today. And of course, what it asks you to do is step back and just ask yourself in those moments of confusion and strain when you're just struggling to cope with what's going on, pull out, reflect a bit on what can we possibly get from this that would support and really propel myself, in terms of self-fulfillment, yourself in terms of self-fulfillment, obviously, for business and for India. So as I said, it's fractal. It's building agility across the layers. And I just played around with this, but resilient agility is an inner game at a personal level. Building resilience in a community is everyone working together, or team, building resilience in a team, everyone team. So that's where the Navy SEALs, for example, any of the military SWAT teams are based on this concept. Sense of belonging, in other words, diverse but sense of belonging. And then restoring it to the level of the planet, agility is we're in it together. These are huge issues, and they're not ones that we can achieve by being small or by pretending they don't exist, because that's how they got there in the first place. So it's a real opportunity to engage in a much larger transformation process using your own agility. I've been using this quote around, and it's a great honor actually to be talking about it with you, because it's a leader that has made an impression in the world. And I was in Delhi when the movie came out many years ago. So that basically the difference of what we are doing and what we're capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problems. He said that back then, and now we are in the place where we get to actually unleash all of that creative talent that's been controlled or limited or constrained, whatever word you want to use, but it's time to turn it loose. So you can find my podcast here. Somebody messaged about blogging. I have to say I haven't been writing a lot because I'm working on a really big book right now, and that's taken a lot of my time, but I'll be back to the blogging and getting that going shortly. So now let's go to you and see what we can talk about. There.
Hey, thank you. Actually, it was a very insightful session and a very serious thought. So when COVID started, nobody thought that it will last for so long and it will go up to a level of a climate change, kind of comparable to a climate change. So now we are starting to accept that COVID is comparable to a climate change problem. It is up to that level. And what we could gather from your talk is like how we should be look at inwards to have the resilient capability to address this and not look at the problems from on outside, and how we should turn it out to an opportunity, how we should basically look at opportunity for innovation and self-expression to come out of this in a very good manner. That was a real thing that we should do now, because we have accepted COVID. We have accepted that it is here to stay for some time, and now is the time to come up with the real solutions and the real innovations and to get benefit out of it or move ahead from it. Thank you very much for this insightful session, and I will open it up to questions from the audience.
I'm going to add something to what you just said, Jay, if I may, and that is that, I traveled in India, as I mentioned, and one of the things that impressed me, and of course, just watching India now, you've got a lot of strengths as a nation. And it's really just saying, okay, let's take those strengths. There's a lot of ingenuity. The poorer people are, the more ingenious the solutions. How to access electricity without accessing electricity, without being on. There's some phenomenal solutions that have come up out of necessity. So really what this is a chance to do is to take those strengths that you share nationally or within a team or however, whatever scale it's in, and apply them. Yeah, so thank you. I just had to remember to plug that in because I remember sitting in India going, whoa, who would have thought of taking that and turning it into that? It was just brilliant.
The one we call as the jugaad. So how to make those jugaads into innovation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for remembering that. There are a few questions for you from the audience. Like first question we have is, have you ever observed leaders facing a challenge practicing transformational leadership? What is your advice on it?
So, sorry, the question is, have I ever observed a challenge in transformational leadership?
Yeah.
Oh.
Have you ever observed like leaders facing a challenge practicing transformational leadership?
Oh, practicing transformational leadership. Okay. Yes, of course. There's a lot. I'll give you an example of a company this is an American company. In the United States, I'm in Canada, just to be very clear, and the United States is a great place to watch how not to do things and also occasionally how to do things. So there was a company executive who was like everybody else. He was looking at his cost thing instead of what he could say. He was looking at a cost very narrow. And what fear does is it brings down a very narrow zone, one option typically. And so he looked at that and said, well, gee, I could just fire all my people, and stay alive. And then he thought, no, that's not the right thing to do. And he backed up and reflected. So basically what a lot of companies could be doing right now, and a lot of people, it's again, whenever I say this, I'm thinking of it in different layers. But it's just pull out and take the time to reflect. Where am I with this issue? What do I want to do with this? And yes, and so that's the first part of it. The second part is, so better balance between action and reflection. Organizations are trained to be busy. They're not trained to look at where they're going, usually. They're just busy. So that's where in the previous chat pane, I was seeing people, it's like you get to spend from 9 to 5 at work. Well, sure, but that's not going to be productive. You'll get to socialize, and that's what most people are wanting to go back to work. They're wanting to socialize. But the real productive times are done in 90-minute sprints. I mean, that's the neuroscience of it. So it's not about productivity for efficiency, it's productivity for effectiveness. And that's, so there's a number of shifts. The other one is changing the decision-making process. So if we look at transforming decision-making in an organization by running off of beliefs, literally people like me who work on the outside because I couldn't work on the inside, I'm a terrible employee. But I'm better from the outside because I can go in and watch patterns and see patterns, and then when COVID or something, a big interruption comes along, it's perfect because this is where we get to use that break to do something else. But the decisions are running on beliefs. So you can walk into a company and you go, this is where they're going. I mean, they're risk adverse. You know exactly where they're going. And so the other aspect of the shift then is, what principles do I use? What values can I use? And I know in India there's a lot of resonance around values. It's plugging them into the decision making and knowing the difference between values and beliefs. They are the highest leverage point for creating sound work cultures, but there's also a really interesting nuance that shows up that people need to be very conscious of it when making those shifts. So I hope that answers the question, but yes, there are people doing it all the time.
Just a personal question there, like what would be the relevance of boards, the company boards, in this kind of times to give those kind of leadership to these leaders who are going through tough times? So the boards become more relevant now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because they are often the place where that kind of initiative, that kind of ambition gets stomped on. Shareholders are a big part of it too. I mean, if you've got companies that are rewarding their executives through shareholder return, honestly, you're setting yourself up for disaster. I mean, that's been covered over and over again. It's not something, it's one of those things like, what dynamic am I creating with this particular structure? If I make boards, allow boards to define things in the short term, then we are cutting ourselves off for moments like this. Yeah, absolutely. It's a team effort all the way.
Now, one more question here, like, does creative thinking play a role in the agile transformation of a firm? So what do you think about creative thinking? Do they really play a role?
It's essential. It's essential. And of course, everybody knows the gap between agile and traditional. It's a completely different worldview. And so what we often see is agilists adopting command and control approaches in order to close the gap. That's not the place to close. That's not the way to do it. If you want to close the gap between agile and traditional thinking, you have to be creative and use a lot of empathy. You need to, so it's really stepping. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Thanks, Dawna. Thanks for this wonderful session. Now we would like.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We'd like to present you with a tree. Please accept this as a token of appreciation for you. We also would like to know that you have contributed to the children's education through the ODAN program, and you have extended a hand to those children, and we thank you for your support for this ODAN program. Thank you so much.